She had always moved quietly through life, as if the world around her was a place meant for others, not for her. Every morning, she woke up in the same small apartment she had rented for years. The walls were thin, the ceiling low, and the furniture worn from years of use. Yet somehow, it felt like home. She didn't need much. A small kitchen where she could make simple meals. A bed that was just comfortable enough, and a little space where she could sit and think were all she required. Most people passed by her without noticing, and she had grown used to it. She had learned that being unnoticed could sometimes be a kind of peace. Her day began like any other. She would walk through streets where the people hurried by, always with a destination in mind, rarely taking a moment to look at the world around them. Shops opened with the clatter of metal shutters. The smell of fresh bread drifted from bakeries, and the chatter of neighbors spilled out from open windows. Yet she was like a shadow in the crowd, present but unseen. She worked at a place that was busy and noisy, a place where she was needed but not celebrated. She moved through her tasks quietly, never asking for attention, never expecting praise. To the others, she was simply someone who got the work done. Nothing more, nothing less. Music had always been a private world for her. When she was a child, she had discovered it in a corner of her home, a dusty old piano that no one seemed to touch. She remembered the first time she pressed a key and heard a note ring out. It was soft and imperfect, yet it made her heart leap. She had taught herself, practicing whenever she could, learning to coax melodies from that old instrument. But as she grew older, life demanded more of her attention, and the piano became a secret companion. It was tucked away like a part of herself she carried quietly. She played in small moments, surly mornings, late nights, when the world outside had quieted. At work, people did not connect her with music. She did not perform for them. She did not show them the part of herself that could turn a simple note into something that touched hearts. They saw her only as the person who arranged supplies, answered questions politely, or filled in wherever needed. Her coworkers often assumed she would not be interested in anything beyond the ordinary tasks they saw her do. She had learned not to be offended. Expectations had been lowered for her so long that she stopped noticing. There were moments when she felt the weight of being underestimated. Sometimes it happened in small, almost invisible ways. A coworker glancing at her with surprise when she knew the answer to something simple. A manager assuming she could not handle more responsibility. Or strangers passing by without a glance as she walked down the street. These moments could have been frustrating, even painful, but she had found a way to turn them into quiet strength. She reminded herself that the world did not get to decide her value. She did not need approval to know her own worth. Still, there were nights when she sat alone in her apartment, the hum of the city outside her window, and she let herself feel the loneliness of being invisible. She would stare at the ceiling or the old walls, thinking about the life she wanted to live, the things she wanted to express, and the music she wished she could share. In those moments, she allowed herself to dream. Even if the dream seemed far away, even if the people around her could never imagine it. Her connection to music was not about fame or recognition. It was something deeper, something essential. When she pressed her fingers against the keys of a piano, the world outside disappeared. She felt a freedom she could not explain, a language that spoke directly to her heart. She could play for hours without thinking of anything else. Notes became her companions, melodies, her private conversations with the universe. The piano became a mirror of her soul, reflecting every emotion she had kept hidden. At work, there was a small room with a piano in one corner. It had been there for years, mostly ignored. People walked past it without a thought. Sometimes someone would sit and press a few keys, but no one ever played with feeling. The piano had seen dust, neglect, and disinterest. Yet she had always felt drawn to it. Even though she rarely had the chance to sit down in front of it, just being near it made her heart quicken. It reminded her of her childhood, of the secret lessons she had given herself, and the music that still lived inside her. She watched her coworkers as they interacted with the piano. Some would joke about it, pretending to be musicians, making a show of pressing keys randomly, laughing at their own attempts. Others ignored it completely, treating it like a piece of furniture. No one considered that the piano could hold something magical, that it could reveal parts of a person hidden deep inside. Most people, she realized, were not ready to see what they thought they could never achieve themselves. They were content with their assumptions, their casual judgments, and their low expectations. She often wondered what it would feel like to surprise someone with her music. To sit down at the piano and play something that would stop people in their tracks, something that would make them feel as though they were hearing it for the very first time. She imagined the look on their faces, the way their assumptions might shatter, and the silence that could follow the first note. It was a private fantasy, one she held close, because reality had taught her that people rarely gave more than a glance or a chance. Her life outside work was equally quiet. She did not go to parties or gatherings. She did not seek attention or approval from others. Her friends were few, but the bonds were deep. They understood her love for music, her quiet way of moving through the world, and the care she took in everything she did. With them she could be herself, without masks or pretenses. But she knew that the outside world rarely offered the same kindness. People had expectations, and when someone did not fit them, they were often dismissed. She had grown used to being underestimated. It was a strange kind of comfort, knowing that no one expected much from her. She could move through life without the pressure of constant evaluation. Yet it also created a hunger, a quiet, burning desire to show the world that the person they ignored had depth, talent, and passion. She dreamed of the day she could take a place that was overlooked and transform it with something that came from her heart. The piano in the workroom called to her more and more. Each day, she found herself lingering nearby, watching it, imagining her hands on the keys. The world around her moved in chaos, people rushing, phones ringing, conversations overlapping, but in her mind, the room became quiet. She could hear the notes in her imagination before they even left her fingers. The music filled her with hope and longing, and she could almost feel the change it could bring to others if they only listened. Despite the low expectations, she prepared herself quietly. She practiced in her apartment, running through pieces she loved, exploring new melodies, and experimenting with rhythms. Each practice session was private, yet she imagined an audience, imagined the surprise, the awe, the change in perception that could occur when people realized she was not just ordinary. She held on to these private rehearsals like a secret power, a gift waiting for the right moment. Every day she observed people around her, their gestures, their laughter, their assumptions. She saw the way they dismissed what they did not understand, the way they underestimated anyone who moved quietly or did not assert themselves. And she remembered that she had something they could not see, yet a depth of feeling, a lifetime of experience, and a connection to music that could speak louder than any words. She carried this knowledge like a secret shield, knowing that one day, the quiet world she inhabited could become a stage for something extraordinary. The contrast between her life and her music became more apparent with each passing day. By morning, she performed tasks with quiet efficiency, moving unseen and unremarked. By night, she became someone else entirely, a musician who could conjure emotion, who could make a piano sing, who could take the notes and turn them into something alive. It was a dual existence, but she learned to embrace it. Each side of her life strengthened the other, giving her patience, focus, and an understanding of the world that few people possessed. And so, she waited. She moved through her daily life with quiet grace, keeping her talent hidden, nurturing it, and imagining the moment when it would be revealed. She had learned to be patient. She had learned that being underestimated was not a weakness, but a chance to surprise the world in the most powerful way. One day, the quiet girl no one noticed would sit at a piano and show everyone what they had been blind to all along. Until that day, she remained in the shadows, observing, dreaming, and preparing. Every step she took, every small action, was part of the journey toward the moment when her music would finally speak for her. The room where the piano waited had seen many people come and go, but none had truly understood it. She imagined herself approaching it one day, sitting down and letting the music flow. She could see the change in the air, the way the world would pause to listen, the way people would realize they had been wrong to assume anything about her. She had felt this in her heart for years, a quiet conviction that one day the music would be heard, and it would not just entertain, it would transform. She lived for that moment even if it had not arrived yet. She moved through her life with quiet determination, nurturing her talent in the shadows, understanding that her time would come. And in the meantime, she played in secret, letting the piano and her imagination sing the songs that no one yet knew. She had always known that people would underestimate her, but she also knew something stronger, that talent, passion, and patience could rise above expectation. And one day, the world would have to listen. She had spent years moving quietly through her days, unseen and underestimated. Every morning, she woke with the same routine, the same quiet apartment, the same inner world filled with music that no one knew about. She had accepted that most people would never notice her, and she had found a strange comfort in it. But that evening was different. Something felt in the air, a tension she could not name. Perhaps it was the way the workday had dragged on, the way the room had felt heavier with noise. Or maybe it was just a feeling deep inside her, telling her that today, things could change. The piano in the corner of the room sat there as always. Its polished surface reflected the light from the lamps above, but it had gathered dust over time. No one seemed to care for it. Most people ignored it. Some used it as a prop to joke around, and a few would tap random notes without a thought. To her, it was not just a piano. It was a door to a world she had carried inside her all her life, a world of sound, emotion, and expression. She could feel the pull of it even from across the room. That day, a few coworkers had gathered for a casual break. They chatted, laughed, and sipped their drinks, their conversation light and careless. One of them, in a half-joking tone, mentioned the piano. "Hey, why don't you play something?" someone said, laughing as if the suggestion was absurd. Others joined in with teasing remarks, nudging her slightly. "Come on, just for fun," another voice added. It's clearly expecting nothing more than a few clumsy notes and some laughter. Her heart skipped a beat. She had faced such moments before, the raised eyebrows, the casual assumptions, the low expectations, but this felt different. She could feel the energy in the room, the quiet disbelief in their eyes, the way they were preparing to be entertained by a failure rather than impressed by a skill. She hesitated. Her hands itched to touch the keys, but her mind warned her of the consequences. If she failed, if the music faltered, she would only confirm their assumptions. She took a deep breath and looked around. The room was full of faces, some curious, some skeptical, and a few already smirking in anticipation of the joke they thought they would witness. She could feel the weight of their lowered expectations pressing down on her. For a moment, she considered stepping back, walking away, pretending she had not heard the challenge. It would have been easy. No one would have judged her for avoiding it. But inside, something stronger stirred. She remembered all the nights she had spent alone, playing music no one would ever hear. She thought of the hours of practice, the private melodies, the secret joy she had carried in her heart. All those moments had led to this. She realized that this was her chance not just to play, but to change how people saw her. The thought made her hands tremble slightly, a mixture of nerves and excitement. She walked toward the piano, each step deliberate, each movement calm despite the rush of emotions inside her as she approached. She noticed the way some of her coworkers leaned back, expecting clumsiness or hesitation. A few whispered to each other, barely concealing their amusement. She could hear it if she focused. The quiet undercurrent of doubt. The invisible boundary of low expectations that everyone had built around her. She ignored it. She sat down on the bench, her fingers hovering above the keys. The room seemed to hold its breath. The first note she played was soft, almost shy, yet it carried clarity. There was a resonance that the others had not expected, a tone that seemed to linger in the air longer than they were prepared for. She felt the vibration of the sound through her fingers, a connection that was deeply personal. The room, once filled with chatter and laughter, began to quiet down. People stopped talking, their attention drawn in despite themselves. She could see the subtle shift in their expressions, curiosity replacing amusement, surprise starting to flicker in their eyes. She continued, building the melody slowly, carefully. Each note was intentional, each chord deliberate. She was not playing to impress. She was playing because it was a part of her, a voice she had carried in silence for so long. The music moved through the room like a gentle wave, touching everyone in ways they had not anticipated. Some leaned forward, their elbows on tables, their heads tilted as if trying to catch every nuance. Others sat upright, frozen by the unexpected beauty. No one spoke. The laughter had vanished, replaced by an attentive hush as she played. Memories of her past washed over her. She remembered the quiet mornings alone at home, the old piano that had first called to her, the nights when she had lost herself in music while the rest of the world slept. She remembered the low expectations she had faced, not just at work, but throughout life, the assumptions made about her abilities, the dismissive glances, the way people judged her before they knew her. And now, here she was, letting her music speak in a room full of skeptics. The melody grew stronger, more confident. She moved her hands with ease, letting her emotions guide her fingers. The music was not just sound. It was a story, a conversation, a revelation. Each note carried a piece of her history, a fragment of her heart, and a glimpse of the talent that had been hidden for so long. The room felt different now. The air seemed charged, as if the piano itself had awakened, demanding attention. The people who had doubted her could no longer do so, at least not without feeling the sting of their own assumptions. She could feel the impact of her playing. A coworker, who had been leaning back with a smirk, now sat forward, eyes wide, clearly trying to process what was happening. Another, who had whispered jokes moments before, had stopped talking entirely, watching with rapt attention. Even those who had appeared disinterested could not hide their surprise. Something had shifted. Something invisible had changed the way they saw her. She had crossed a line they had never thought she could reach. Her confidence grew with every measure. The nervousness that had fluttered in her chest at the beginning melted away, replaced by a calm determination. She no longer played carefully to avoid mistakes. She played boldly, letting the music flow naturally, expressing everything she had kept inside. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of her voice, a bridge between her private world and the reality around her. She felt free, liberated, and completely herself. Time seemed to stretch. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but because the music demanded it. Each chord was a statement, each phrase a proof of her existence and her abilities. She could feel the room vibrating with the sound, the way the notes hung in the air, touching everyone present. Even without words, she was communicating, telling a story that no one could ignore. As the final notes approached, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her fingers ached slightly, but the ache was sweet. It was the physical proof of effort, practice, and dedication. The music softened, winding down like a river finding its way to the sea. She let the last chord resonate, holding it for a moment longer than necessary, feeling its echo in the room. Then silence. Absolute, complete silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The weight of what they had just witnessed hung in the air. Then slowly, the room began to react. Eyes widened, mouths opened, and a low murmur of disbelief spread through the group. It was not just applause, it was a mixture of surprise, admiration, and an almost tangible acknowledgement that they had been wrong. The low expectations they had carried with them like invisible chains had been shattered in a matter of minutes. She stood from the piano, her hands still tingling from the effort. She did not speak. She did not need to. The music had done what words could not. People approached her, hesitant at first, as if unsure whether it was real or if they had imagined it. One person said, almost breathlessly, I didn't know you could play like that." Another added, "That was incredible." I never expected." They stumbled over their words, trying to express what they felt, but words seemed inadequate. She smiled softly, not out of pride, but out of a quiet satisfaction. She had played for herself, for the music, and for the truth of who she was. Recognition from others was a byproduct, not the purpose. She had raised the bar, not by showing off, but by revealing a hidden part of herself in a moment when no one expected it. The rest of the evening passed in a haze, People kept returning to the piano, asking her questions, trying to hear more. Some wanted to learn, some wanted to understand, but all were aware that something had changed. She had crossed a threshold, moving from the background to a place of quiet. Undeniable respect. Later, when the room had emptied and the sounds of the day faded, she sat alone for a moment. She let the memory of the music linger, savoring the taste of what had happened. She knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The low expectations had been lifted, and she had shown not just skill, but resilience, patience, and the quiet power of persistence. She realized something important that night. The world often underestimated people who moved quietly, who kept their talents hidden, and who did not demand attention. But when those people finally reveal themselves, they can do so in ways that are unforgettable. She had not only played music, she had changed perceptions, shifted energy, and reminded everyone that appearances and assumptions are often wrong. From that moment, she understood that the piano was more than just an instrument. It was a key to transformation, a bridge to possibilities, and a stage on which she could quietly, powerfully show the world who she really was. The laughter and low expectations of the past had no place here. The music had spoken louder than any doubt, and she had proven to herself and to everyone watching that talent, patience, and courage could always rise above what others thought possible. After that first evening at the piano, everything seemed different. The room where she had played was no longer just a place where people passed through. It had become a space of possibility. She walked by it during the day and felt a quiet hum of energy. People were still talking about what they had witnessed, their disbelief lingering in whispers and glances. The memory of that moment stayed with her, a warm light inside that reminded her of what could happen when she trusted herself. At work, the atmosphere shifted. Some coworkers approached her more carefully now, with a quiet respect that had not existed before. There were no longer jokes about her, no smirks, no low expectations. People began to watch her in a new way, curious, almost cautious, as if afraid to make assumptions again. She noticed the change but remained herself. She did not flaunt her ability, did not boast. She simply continued with her work, letting her actions speak louder than words. The piano began to call to her more often. Some days she would find herself lingering near it, just feeling its presence. Other times, she would practice in her apartment, imagining how she could express more, how she could let her music tell stories beyond simple melodies. She realized that music was not just about playing notes. It was about touching hearts, creating moments that could never be forgotten. She had felt it the first time she played for her coworkers, but now she understood it more deeply. One afternoon, an unexpected opportunity arrived. The manager of her workplace announced that there would be a small gathering in the room, a casual celebration for a team that had done well on a recent project. It was informal, but there would be people from other departments, and the piano would be available. The manager joked lightly. Maybe someone can play a few notes for us, not realizing that the quiet girl who had just walked past was the one I should have been talking about. She felt a flutter of nerves. It was one thing to play for a few coworkers, but another to play for a slightly larger crowd. She could hear the whispers of doubt in her mind. What if it doesn't work? What if people don't appreciate it? What if they laugh or dismiss her again? But the memories of her first performance strengthened her resolve. She remembered the way the music had flowed, the way people had paused and listened, the way the air had shifted in the room. She could do it again. She could rise above expectation once more. The gathering began. People mingled, laughing, chatting, eating, and enjoying the informal celebration. She stayed quiet at first, observing, letting the room settle around her. She waited for the right moment, a moment when she could let the music speak for her. She walked toward the piano slowly, aware of every step, every glance, every expectation or lack of expectation that followed her. Some people turned their heads, curious but not yet certain of what they would see. Her fingers touched the keys lightly at first, testing the familiar surface. The notes rang out softly, delicate and clear. The room, filled with chatter and laughter, began to quiet again. Conversations faltered as people turned their attention toward her. Some were surprised, some skeptical, and some simply curious. But they all listened. The first few notes were enough to change the energy of the room. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but the shift was undeniable. She played with growing confidence. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper, then grew steadily, filling the room with a warm, compelling sound. Each chord seemed to carry meaning beyond itself, touching something inside the hearts of those listening. People leaned in unconsciously, their attention drawn by a force they could not name. The music was no longer just her secret world. It was now theirs as well. She noticed the reactions of those around her. One person had their hand over their mouth, eyes wide in surprise. Another had tears quietly forming, a hand resting on the table as if to steady themselves. Even people who had previously dismissed her seemed moved, unable to look away, caught by the unexpected depth and feeling in her playing. She felt the power of music as a bridge between her inner world and the world outside. A language that required no words and no explanation. The melody grew more complex. She let her emotions guide her fingers, allowing the piano to speak truth she had never dared to say aloud. The room was no longer just a gathering space. It had become a sanctuary, a place where ordinary people could feel extraordinary things. Each note told a story of patience, of quiet perseverance, of a life lived mostly in the shadows but filled with passion and skill. She played not to impress, not to show off, but to share a piece of herself that had always been waiting for this moment. Time seemed to lose meaning. She was fully absorbed in the music, unaware of the minutes slipping by. People had stopped talking, stopped moving, and even the smallest gestures became intentional. Some closed their eyes to better hear the flow of sound. Others simply watched, captivated by the transformation in both the music and the person playing it. She could feel the room holding its breath, caught in the tension and beauty of the performance, as the piece reached its peak. She let herself fully express every feeling she had carried for so long. The music rose, fell, swirled, and soared, carrying the room with it. People leaned forward, some unconsciously holding hands, some gripping their chairs, all feeling the impact of something they could not fully name. It was not just skill they were witnessing. It was authenticity, vulnerability, and a rare honesty that cannot be faked. She remembered her early days, practicing alone, learning to understand the language of music, discovering the small joys of melody and rhythm. All that solitude, all that effort, all those years of quiet preparation had led to this moment. She could feel it in the vibrations under her fingers, the way the notes filled the room, and in the reactions of those who listened. Every low expectation that had ever been cast toward her was falling away, replaced by recognition, surprise, and awe. The room seemed to pause with her, caught in the swell of the music. Laughter, chatter, and casual conversation had vanished completely. People were moved in ways they had not anticipated. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others had expressions of sheer amazement. Even the most skeptical seemed touched, their assumptions shattered not by words but by sound, by the invisible power of music that demanded attention and respect. She played on, her fingers flying across the keys with precision and grace. Yet it was not just technical skill. It was feeling, heart, and truth. She could sense the emotions of the listeners, the way they were being carried along by the notes. The music connected them to her in ways no conversation could. It told them who she was, what she had lived through, and what she was capable of. It was a silent declaration. She was more than they thought. She was strong, talented, and alive with possibility. The piece wound down slowly, each note lingering just long enough to leave its mark. She allowed the final chord to resonate, filling the space with sound that seemed to echo in every corner. Then silence. Absolute, complete silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The impact of what had just occurred hung in the air, heavy, powerful, and undeniable. People blinked, some swallowing hard, others shaking their heads as if to confirm it had actually happened. Then, as if released from a spell, the room erupted, not in loud applause at first, but in murmurs of disbelief, whispers of admiration, and quiet exclamations of awe. Someone said, "I can't believe that just happened." Another added, She's incredible. I never imagined." Words stumbled over themselves, failing to fully capture what had been felt. But the message was clear. They had witnessed something extraordinary. She sat back, breathing steadily, a quiet smile on her face. She did not need the words of praise, but they were there, flowing toward her naturally. The recognition was a gift, but the true reward was the connection she had made through music. She had shown them a part of herself that could not be ignored, a truth that had always existed but had never been seen before. In that moment, the room felt transformed, just as she herself felt transformed. She realized that the piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a bridge between her world and the world around her. She had learned something essential that day, that when she shared her true self, when she trusted her ability and her voice, people could see beyond assumptions, beyond low expectations, and beyond appearances. The music had done what words could not. It had reached into hearts, touched emotions, and left a mark that could not be erased. Later, after the room had emptied, she remained sitting at the piano for a while longer. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, as if they were still connected to the echoes of the piece she had just played. She reflected on what had happened, the shift in energy, the way people had reacted, and the quiet pride that rose within her. She understood now that moments like this were rare and precious. They were the culmination of patience, skill, and the courage to step into the spotlight when no one expected it. She stood slowly, her body still vibrating with the energy of the music. She knew that the experience had changed something within her. The world might continue to underestimate people, to judge them too quickly, to lower expectations without knowing the truth. But she also knew that when she chose to step forward, when she let her talent shine, she could redefine those expectations, not with words, but with actions and with heart. From that day forward, the piano was no longer a secret. It was a part of her world that others could glimpse, a source of connection, inspiration, and proof that patience and perseverance could overcome any assumption. She had discovered the power of sharing her true self, and the joy of knowing that people could be surprised, moved and inspired by something real, authentic, and deeply human. After the first few performances at the piano, she realized something she had never fully understood before. The world was quick to judge, to dismiss, and to lower expectations. But it was equally capable of wonder, awe, and quiet respect when given a reason to see someone's true ability. She had seen it in the eyes of her coworkers, in the way they leaned in and held their breath as the notes filled the room. And now, a part of her wanted to see just how far she could take it. She began to imagine not just playing melodies that were familiar, but pushing herself to explore pieces she had only dared to play in private. These were complex compositions, ones that required precision, emotion, and patience. In the solitude of her apartment, she had practiced them for months, hours at a time, letting the music become a part of her very being. Now, the idea of sharing them with others made her both nervous and excited. The thought that she could raise the bar even higher thrilled her in a way she could not ignore. Her next opportunity came unexpectedly. The manager of the department, impressed by her previous performances, asked if she could play for a visiting group from another branch. They were not musicians, not critics, just ordinary people coming to observe and learn about the workplace. Most would have assumed that such a request was casual, even unimportant. But she understood that this was her chance. She could take what she had already shown and elevate it, not to prove herself, but to share a piece of beauty that could touch others. The day arrived, and she prepared carefully. She chose a piece she had never performed publicly, one that carried layers of feeling, a story embedded in every note. She sat at the piano for a long time before playing, her hands hovering above the keys as she took a deep breath. She felt the weight of expectation, not just from others, but from herself. She wanted to give them something real, something unforgettable. She wanted to raise the bar, show that music could be more than entertainment, it could be a revelation. When she began, the first notes were soft, deliberate, almost whispering into the room. People turned their heads, curious. They had seen her play before, and they expected something good. But this time, the music was different. It was deeper, more intricate, more alive. It was as if the piano itself had awakened to reveal secrets it had been holding. Each chord resonated with feeling. Each melody carried a story that spoke directly to the heart. The visitors leaned in, unable to look away. They were not musicians, so they could not analyze her technique, but they felt the emotion in every note. They felt the years of practice, the quiet perseverance, and the patience she had cultivated. They were witnessing someone transform a simple instrument into a voice that could move people without words. The energy in the room shifted. It was no longer a casual gathering, but a space filled with awe and quiet reverence. She played with confidence, allowing the music to flow naturally from her. Her fingers moved with a fluidity that had been honed over countless hours of practice. She did not rush, nor did she hold back. Every note was intentional, every phrase measured, every silence meaningful. The room responded in kind. People leaned forward, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the sound, others holding their breath as if not to disturb the magic. It was a shared experience, silent communication between the pianist and the listeners. As the piece progressed, she could feel the impact she was having. It was not just about skill anymore. It was about presence, about the ability to command attention without speaking, to tell a story without words. She could see subtle changes in posture, in facial expressions, in the way people's eyes followed her hands. Some were moved to tears, others to quiet smiles, and a few simply stared in disbelief at the depth and authenticity of what they were experiencing. She allowed herself to become fully immersed in the music, letting the piano carry her emotions as well. She thought about the moments of doubt she had faced in her life, the low expectations people had imposed on her, and the countless hours of private practice that had led to this moment. She poured all of that into the music, and the room responded. It was no longer about proving herself. It was about sharing something that could not be contained, something that demanded to be felt. The visitors, and even her co-workers, could not hide their astonishment. Some whispered quietly, trying not to disturb the flow of music, while others simply sat in awe. The room seemed to breathe with the sound, the piano resonating not just in the space, but in the hearts of those listening. She had transformed a simple room into a sanctuary, a place where ordinary people could feel extraordinary emotions. She reached the crescendo of the piece, the moment where the music swelled and filled every corner of the room. Her hands moved with precision, speed, and grace, but every note was infused with emotion. She could sense the tension, the anticipation, the unspoken admiration in the audience. They had come expecting something pleasant, maybe even impressive, but they were witnessing something rare, something that transcended expectation. The final notes echoed through the room. Lingering in the air as if reluctant to leave, she held them, savoring the resonance, feeling the connection she had forged with everyone present. Then silence. Absolute silence. It was a silence filled with understanding, awe, and a recognition that what had just occurred could not be forgotten. The low expectations they had carried into the room had been completely erased. She had raised the bar not with words, but with action, with talent, with authenticity. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first, as if people were checking whether they were allowed to respond. Then it grew, swelling into a wave of admiration that filled the room. People stood, clapped, and some even wiped away tears. There were murmurs of praise, exclamations of wonder, and quiet acknowledgments that this was something extraordinary. They had expected something ordinary. She had given them something unforgettable. She stood from the piano, her body trembling slightly from the effort and emotion. She smiled softly, a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. She had not sought this recognition, but it was a confirmation of what she had always known, that talent, patience, and courage could rise above any assumption. She had not just played music. She had shared a piece of her soul, and it had been received with the respect and admiration it deserved. Afterward, as people approached her, she felt a mixture of humility and pride. They asked questions, complimented her, and some simply stood quietly, overwhelmed by what they had experienced. She answered politely, but she did not need to say much. The music had spoken for her, louder, and more clearly than words ever could. She had shown them that the quiet girl they had underestimated was capable of astonishing greatness. Later, when the room had emptied, she remained seated at the piano for a while. Reflecting on what had just happened, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of quiet practice, the moments of doubt, the times she had been overlooked. She understood now that every moment of being underestimated had prepared her for this. Every silent hour of dedication had led to the ability to rise above expectation. She realized that raising the bar was not just about skill or talent. It was about courage, persistence, and the willingness to step forward when the moment was right. It was about trusting oneself, even when the world doubted, even when expectations were low. She had learned that the true power of music and of any talent lay not in proving others wrong, but in expressing something real, authentic, and deeply human. From that day forward, the piano was no longer just a part of her private world. It had become a tool, a voice, and a bridge between her inner self and the world around her. She continued to play, each time pushing herself further, exploring new melodies, and sharing new emotions. People listened, admired, and learned that the quietest individuals often hold the greatest power, the deepest talent, and the ability to transform spaces and hearts with their presence.